Okay, can you hear me okay? Right. Can you see the little chat box when on the screen? I'm not sure whether that records or not. No, okay. I've got a different chat box out. I've got the pop-up from the actual site rather than the one from Procaster. Before, I couldn't see that picture of Sentry up in the corner because my chat box was covering it. But now, because I've got the other one, it's the one, so I don't have to like nip to the website in between. Sentry was in hiding. So yes, for people who are seeing this chapter who haven't seen the others, we've got Orange Punch's version of Annals of Fear at the top. We've got Brooke Stardust's version of Sentry up in the corner, and we've got Spoilt Kitten's version of Deontic down in the other corner. The rest of us general pictures of Mello and Matti from off the internet, which are on my desktop. So. And in chat now we have 6 people. We've got Nicotinook, we've got Brooke Stardust, Rooney Bear has gone to have real life. I think Alex H. Neil is still here, but I'm not quite sure who else is. So, the chapter we're now going to do is from Annals of Fear 1, and it's Helen Chluidig. Oh God! Shall I try that again? Chwythag, Ellen Chwythag, helpu. I can't speak Welsh really. Right. This is another long chapter, so part 1. Sentry ran, crashing through bracken and swerving at the last minute to avoid crashing into trees. He slipped and slid towards the woodland. He could hear the dogs, their barking more like gnashing howls, like the hounds on the scent of a fox. They could well have been foxes. He didn't look back to see. His dad had told him about the old stories when he was just a kid. He remembered having nightmares once about the Bethlehem Mammy, because his dad had told him that they stole children from their beds. His mum had shouted at her dad then, telling him no more stories. But for Sentry, stories were the lifeblood filling his veins. They still were. He ran, but his mind soared above, trying to recall all that his dad had said about the Kumanun, before he caught sight of their white forms. That was it. They were huge, with white fur and red tips to their ears. The further away they were, the louder their cries, full of lamentation. Up close they sounded softer, like the hounds on the scent of a... Sentry saw white shapes moving out from either side of him, passing behind the trees. The night air flickered with tiny little dots, and they seemed to fade in and out of view. Slick, huge canine shapes. Sentry rushed at an ash tree and tried to scale its sheer trunk like a pole. But the bark shaved away, and he landed on his feet after barely clearing 2 feet off the ground. The barking had stopped. He could hear their breathing in the air around him. That was his dad again. Memory thrown up the old advice passed from grandfather to grandson. Yestimbach, if you're ever in trouble out there, call on Helen of the Hosts. The old girl will see you safely home. His back to the tree, it became almost like a chant. Always with the image of Jan Peterson in his head, torn to pieces out in this very wood. There was a bright flash which lit up all of the woodland around him. Sentry stared. In that brief illumination he'd seen nothing. No dogs, no foxes, not the Kumanun or anything sent to from folklore or hell to get to him. A trick of his eyes? Sentry peered upwards, hearing the rumble of thunder an instant before the skies opened and the rain poured down. Sentry pushed away from the tree and ran. Oh shit, I've just got hiccups. Sorry. Also, Nicotine Hookah's just left, and I've just got hiccups. Let's have a quick drink. Yes, I'm hiccuping. Right, it seems to have gone away. Let's try this again. Right. Part 2. The glass jar shattered in Matt's hand, cascading shards, liquids, nails, tacks and all the other sharp objects inside down onto his head. They bounced off his goggles and cut his nose and cheeks. Only now did he realise that the liquid had been urine. He leapt back off the ladder, spitting and cursing. His glove after he'd raised it to his face and shone a torch onto it, came back bloody. It had been a stupid thing to try and use that jar as a hammer. Matt had known that if he could just hit it hard enough to close the nails, then he could prise the floorboards up and escape. But his hands under the gloves were both bruised. The candle just flaked and bent out of shape, and he hadn't even bothered trying with the skull. Matt stepped back into the darkness. His torch picked out a circle on the floor, showing most of the symbol. He prized his left hand out of the glove and explored his face some more. Blood was trickling, not pouring. It was probably just a few scratches that stung like hell. He shook his head and more nails and glass shattered to the floor. It was in his hair. There was nothing he could do about it. He put his glove back on and shone his torch back onto the ladder. If Mello was out there, he'd probably do something acrobatic like hang upside down and click the floorboards out. Matt had briefly attempted that, but he didn't have the Parker-toned upper arm strength. Mello could dual-fire berettas. Matt couldn't, and that was the difference between a fitness freak and a geek. Matt rolled another cigarette and smoked it. He shone a torch into the corner of the room and followed it to sit down upon it. Nicotine was calming. Matt touched the collar around his neck and deliberately recalled Mello's promise to him. "I will always come for you, Mile." What concerned Matt most of all was not that Mello hadn't come per se, but why Mello hadn't come. The Slav had been antsy and paranoid out there, bordering upon obsessive. Matt had reasoned it out, and Mello should have come, because he was possessive. Mello saw Matt as something belonging to him, as though sheer pride should have brought him running back to find him. Matt further deduced that Mello would have come, even if it was only Deontic or Sentry trapped here. Mello viewed himself as the general in this case, and therefore wouldn't leave anyone behind enemy lines. Matt paused, revisiting that theory. Mello had left people to fend for themselves on at least one occasion. That night when the Japanese officers stormed into his mafia hideout, Mello had looked after number 1. Matt knew, because Mello had told him. Matt considered it, drawing heavily upon his cigarette. Blood dripped down his face to his thigh, just one large splodge of it. Matt surveyed it, then wiped an arm across his cheeks, mouth and nose. The sleeve of his striped shirt came back moderately bloody. He wasn't actually bleeding to death, but there were more cuts than he had imagined. Mello would hate that. Matt rolled another cigarette immediately. The one thing that worried him most of all was that, logically, for Mello not to have come, then Mello must have been waylaid himself. Matt dreaded to imagine the nature of something that could stop Mello coming for him right now. That meant something must have priority. Facts threw themselves into Matt's mind. He had abandonment issues, that was official. He chemically could not believe that Mello would come for him. That replied more oxytocin than Matt could produce. Mello always took every opportunity to state that he would never leave him again. "I will always come for you, Mile." Mello said things like that with such passion and emotion, as if he thought that by feeling it too much he could somehow make up for the deficiency in Matt's ability to grasp it. Matt considered the fact that Mello would come. Definitely. It was a rational conclusion. All he had to do was wait. The torch was now starting to dim, not a great deal. It wasn't as if the batteries were about to run out right now. Matt sighed. He switched it off to conserve energy. In the sudden darkness he heard a new sound, a pitter-patter and a scratching. Matt inhaled a large gulp of cigarette smoke as he sprang to his feet, taking out his gun. Rats. There were fucking rats in here. Part 3. Mello sat on the step, third from bottom, drawn into himself and shaking. He still clutched his gun and his broken rosary, but his mind was ablaze. He didn't know what to do. He just had this tremendous sense of being in such big trouble. Outside, the world flashed and raged, and he couldn't tell if it was the war come back or just a thunderstorm. His reason was throwing up conflicting explanations, and he didn't know if he was still down here, still in the darkness with the gunpowder, because it was the safest place to be, or was it the most dangerous area? Should he be fleeing from here? Most of all, he had no idea if he was mad or sane anymore. It was too overwhelming. It was pressing down upon his psyche, and he'd run out of places to run inside his head. His lips wouldn't even form the words of a prayer, though he tried. "Throw for marriage" was as far as he got before the shivering took him over, and he sat coiled into himself. "Have you even checked to see if there is a light in here?" A female voice spoke suddenly from a few feet away. Mello leapt on his stare. His gaze shot up from where it had only vaguely been focused upon the ground between his feet. His sensibilities reeled at putting a name to the familiar voice. "Natalie." "Yes, bit of a shocker there, I'll warrant," the darkness replied. There was the clipping of stiletto heels on the cement floor. "Two possible theories to my mind. The first is that this house is a psychic pressure cooker, allowing anything through. And the second is you're hallucinating based on Deontic's comment earlier that I would have handled you far better than she can. You've glimpsed the ghost of a whammy kid before when you've been under extreme stress, so that's a distinct possibility." Mello gaped. He stared into the shadows trying to discern her, but none of them moved. When I saw her he didn't answer back. "How do you know? You were mad." Mello gripped his rosary so hard that he could feel it digging in, even through his leather gloves. "I broke my rosary." Natalie snapped. "Yes, you did, Mihail. Now, are you going to revert to infancy and blart over it, or are you going to put on the light, find the bead, have a look around, and then go and find Matt?" "There was someone firing a gun out there. If I put a light on, that person will know my location." "Have you heard another shot since?" Natalie countered. She was by the wall. He could hear her heels as she paced. He could smell mints over the top of the sulphur. "Do you even know that the gunman was an enemy? And since when did you cower from gunfire? Rod Ross would have loved that." Mello stood up, uncertainty creasing his brow. "How do you know about Rod Ross?" "Finally!" Natalie sneered. "Mello is using his brain. There might be some resolution in this situation after all." Silence filled the distance between them, solid in its tension. Mello could feel a scream starting to rise up in front of him. Natalie sighed. "You told me. You told us in my flat before Hollow put a bullet in my head." "Is it a storm out there, or the Dominovsky rat?" Her response stripped sarcasm. "Oh, it's Yugoslavia in the middle of sodding Wales." She warmed to her theme. "Did you know there's a cleft hill in Gwent that is purportedly split in two at the moment of Christ's crucifixion? As if the events of the Middle East can impact here, I'm sure that a civil war in Eastern Europe nearly 2 decades ago can make it just fine." Mello could hear the thunder now. It sounded nothing like bombs dropping. "It's a storm." "And?" I might have hallucinated the gunshot too." "So?" "I need to find Matt." Mello took a step forward, but fear was still making his legs feel leaden. He could see through the triscular carving now. It was raining hard, but the mountain was illuminated by lightning. Only lightning. He paused, his heart pounding. "Are you really here, Natalie?" No reply. "Why would you come to me? You hated me." "Then why did I invite you to my house?" Mello gulped, his mouth dry. "You wrote a whole thread in a forum about how it would make your day to discover that I died horrifically." Natalie chuckled. "Oh, Michael, don't you know that we were raised to demonise each other? You were not real until the moment you walked into Linda's gallery, and I respected you for that. It couldn't have been an easy thing to do." A spark of pride lit up Mello's core. It was like a lone flare of hope in the middle of his terror. He turned to look back, trying to see her. "Thank you." "You're welcome." "What do you think I should do?" Mello felt the question hang in the air. It sounded like stalling because it was. It occurred to him that That might not be real. She had said that he could be hallucinating her, and he was so scared. I'm asking you, as a genius, as one of Elle's successors, what would you do if you were me, Natalie? Natalie sounded subdued. I can hear you. I'm just getting over the shock that you've consulted me. I thought my intellect was nothing to you. Mello didn't know how to respond to that, so he said nothing. Ah, I see. There was a light scraping as her stiletto dragged across the cemented floor as she paced. I'd put on the light so you can see what's down here, and then I'd go and find Matt and Deontic and Sentry, because if you're in this mess, what kind of crap are they in? Mello exhaled loudly. Oh my fucking God, Mile! He raced up the remaining stone steps, his hand on the wooden doors. As he touched them, the basement behind him erupted into light. Mello gasped and span around, his back to the door, and he could see the whole room, and he was alone. There were no boxes, just a heap of coal piled up in one corner, spreading out across half of the basement floor. A spade and a pair of gardening gloves were laid upon them. No gunpowder, no bombs. He hadn't felt coal under his feet, but the dust was all over his boots and clothes. He must have knocked over the spade. His gaze took in the whole expanse. There were no nooks to hide in. There was no smell of sulphur any more. There was nothing but himself, the coal, the spade, the gloves, and an overpowering scent of mints. 4. Part 4. Rain poured like a monsoon down on the river, sending up splashes that drenched Deontic to the bone. Her feet still found purchase upon the rocks, but the water was rising, crashing around them as rapids. She was sobbing so much that her throat was ripped raw, and her glasses steamed more heavily than the mist around. All around her was the howling of dogs or foxes, or the Cumaman, or Mochinot, or Grachiraban. She didn't know. She didn't know. She just heard them keen, barking, howling, echoing from unseen banks through the mist, and it broke her heart. Sentry was out there somewhere, and he'd said that they only went after the Welsh. Not some insignificant Malaysian girl, a long way from home, who had spent her entire life failing. The urge to just let go and throw herself into the waters was very strong now. Deontic shuffled slightly, almost losing her balance, a hand going down to touch a rock, so wet to the touch, saturated. She imagined how her body would feel, frozen in the river, bashing up against the rocks, broken and drowned. Was this how Maya Gudafson went? Even now there was competitiveness. Deontic wondered how far her own body would wash up. Could she beat the distance of the Swedish woman? Could she finally win something? She toppled and almost fell, landing instead on her backside. All she had to do was lean backwards and she would be in, she would be gone. And the howling went on. She could hear her own voice inside her head, one last desperate cry. Run, Yestin, run! Deontic swayed, trapped by the monsoon, breaking on the rocks, and in the howling she could almost hear her words, screeching, keening, screaming words in a language that she didn't understand. She projected with all her might the thought, the sentiment. Run, Yestin, don't let Mello catch you! Mello, the monster of her teenage years, whom Hal said was secretly just a scared little boy. Hal. Deontic fumbled with sodden fingers at the zip in her coat. It opened bit by bit, half sticking in the fabric, but it was enough. She inched the mobile phone out and couldn't see the screen. So much rain, so many tears. Her thumb found unlock on the 13th try, and she bowed her head to cry some more. It took more strength of character and will than she thought she possessed, but Deontic, by touch alone, found her speed dial. She didn't dare hope for a signal, not down here, trapped in a river. But Wattery had its own telephonic system. It was attached to a powerful satellite. It rang out. Deontic barely heard Hal's voice, distant and muffled, before she gushed out amidst the sobs. Come and get us! Come and get us! Come and get us! Come and get us! In the mist, Deontic saw a hideous woman rising, withered arms longer than they should be, face contorted in a ghastly wail. Deontic screamed and screamed. That's the end of chapter 23. Brooke Stardust is saying, more people learning well from Anne. You go, Natalie. And she wants to hug them even more now. I'm going to pause again, because like I say, my throat is a bit like sandpaper at the moment.